With Tom Holland's Spider-Man trilogy coming to its conclusion with 2021's Spider-Man No Way Home, many questions have been asked regarding the future of Tom Holland's Spider-Man, which includes things such as when is the next film going to release, what's the story going to be, is he going to be appearing in the upcoming Avengers movies, and a question that I'm most concerned about: who is going to be the villain? One thing that I've absolutely loved about Tom Holland's Spider-Man trilogy inside of the Marvel Cinematic Universe has been how each film has really shown us a new original villain that had never been shown on screen before. Spider-Man Homecoming, of course, had Michael Keaton as the Vulture. Spider-Man Far From Home had Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. And No Way Home obviously was a little bit of an exception in that regard because it did feature multiple old villains coming back from previous films. But I'll let that slide purely for the fact that that film was fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to Spider-Man 4 because I want to see what other original villain that we could see on screen for the first time. So I'm going to go through a couple of options about who I think are likely candidates to be the main protagonist and also main antagonist, I should say, for this upcoming fourth Spider-Man film. But make sure you leave your own options and choices in the comment section down below. Let me know who you believe is going to be the villain for this upcoming Spider-Man film, and let's discuss. So I'll get the obvious one out of the way first, and that is Venom. Now, Venom obviously is a very, very popular Spider-Man villain at this point, and very notable, very well-known Spider-Man villain. And even though Venom has appeared on screen before, of course, in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3, the reason why I feel like this is an obvious choice is because, obviously, following the post-credit scene from Spider-Man No Way Home, we did see the symbiote from Tom Hardy's Venom actually end up in the MCU, or at least a little slither of him anyway. So that would indicate, from the way Marvel works with their post-credit scenes, we are going to see Venom and the black suit Spider-Man show up at some point in the near future. But is that in Spider-Man 4? I personally think no. I think Spider-Man 4, by the end of that film, I think we will see him potentially get the black suit and become one with the symbiote. We'll see that kind of relationship begin. But I don't believe that he will kind of become symbiote Spider-Man, in the same way we saw in Spider-Man 3, and I also don't believe that Venom is going to be the villain in Spider-Man 4. I don't think that's going to happen in the next movie. Like I say, I think he will get the black suit, and I think that's mainly because if Spider-Man does end up appearing in Secret Wars, which I'm sure he probably will, in the comic of Secret Wars, Peter did have the black suit by that point. So I think, if you're just looking at the chronology of things, I think Spider-Man 4 will likely come out before Secret Wars, in which case we'll get a new story, and by the end of the film he will have the black suit, and then he'll have that going into Secret Wars, and perhaps in Secret Wars we'll see Peter start to become a bit more angry and a bit more angsty, kind of like we got hints of a little bit towards at the end of No Way Home when he was fighting Green Goblin. And then in Spider-Man 5, that's when we might see that story really kick into gear, and we'll finally get Venom introduced into the MCU. But I don't think it's going to be Spider-Man 4. Another choice I see thrown around is Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin, which I think is a really cool idea. I just personally don't see it happening. If we do get Kingpin, I could see his role being very small, kind of like a minor villain that perhaps Spidey fights in the beginning of the movie. But I think the character of Kingpin, Wilson Fisk, I think particularly is going to be mainly reserved for Daredevil. Like, of course, we know he's going to be in Daredevil Born Again. And I think that as a character, he's a bit more in line with Daredevil, and particularly like this MCU version of Kingpin and the MCU version of Daredevil. I think they're going to pair together and keep them together. Like, sure, we might get a cameo. Like, I know a lot of people really want like the Daredevil Spider-Man team up fighting the Kingpin, and they could do that. Like I say, I think they could do that as almost like an opening of the film sort of thing. I just personally, as cool as it would be, I personally don't see the Kingpin being a primary antagonist for a Spider-Man film. I think he's going to be Daredevil's villain when it comes to the MCU. And another choice, which I actually wasn't on my original list when I was planning this video, it's actually just came into my head right now as recording, so I'll do it very, very quickly. Craven the Hunter. Now, I'm only really chucking Craven in here because just while recording this, it did come into my head that Tom Holland did mention that the story for No Way Home, if they weren't able to get, all the actors back, weren't able to get all the villains back, and Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire, if that wasn't possible, their backup story was going to be Craven. So that does beg the question, could they bring in Craven for Spider-Man 4? If that was the kind of backup plan for Spider-Man 3, then perhaps they do have ideas of how that story was going to go. I personally think it's unlikely. Like I say, I think it was a backup plan, and I don't think they really ever had, there's certainly not a script or anything. There might be some ideas floating around that they sort of pitched, but I don't think there's really a Craven-focused Spider-Man movie, you know, floating around out there. I think that was just an idea that they had if things didn't go to plan. And also with Sony doing their own Craven movie with Aaron Taylor-Johnson, I just think that kind of crossover at this point in time isn't really going to happen. So yeah, Craven, it's a possibility just because it nearly happened, I guess, or at least could have happened. But given the fact that it didn't, and I think there's other things they want to focus on, I don't really see them doing Craven at this point in time, despite the fact that that could be a cool villain to use. Now, moving into my last two, which are kind of like my two main picks for who I think will be, potentially could be the villain of this film. Firstly, Mr. Negative. Now, the main reason I think it could be Mr. Negative is I think because at this point in time in Peter Parker's story in the MCU, I feel like it's a great time to introduce Martin Lee. Now, there is a slight issue here because obviously with Martin Lee, he works in Feast, which is kind of like a charity organization, and he also works closely with Aunt May, or at least in the PlayStation universe he does anyway. Obviously, Aunt May died in the last movie, so they have to kind of write around that in a way. But I think that given the situation Peter Parker is in right now, obviously he's kind of starting his life afresh, I could see him going down the route of potentially working at this homeless shelter to try and help people on the ground as Peter Parker, as well as Spider-Man. It could also help him kind of keep an ear to the ground. He can hear about things going on, because obviously people who are homeless and living on the streets, they hear things. They hear things that go on around, especially in a big city like New York. It could also help Peter from the Spider-Man angle to kind of fight crime that way. And if you're going to introduce the homeless shelter and Feast, well, the guy who runs that is Martin Lee. So I think that in Spider-Man 4, I think a really cool, interesting villain choice could be Mr. Negative, and he did prove in the Spider-Man PS4 game that he is a very interesting, formidable villain who can fight Spider-Man, and I think that could be a really cool thing to see in live action, especially because the sequences you've got in that game of kind of Peter in these kind of hallucinatory states and stuff could be really fun visually. You know, Spider-Man Far From Home showed us with the Mysterio sequences how cool they were to be represented on screen. I think a similar thing could be done with Mr. Negative. He's just a cool villain, and like I say, I think at this particular point in the MCU, in Peter Parker's story, he's a good character to introduce at this point. I think he would make sense here, you know, especially as this is kind of like a reset point for the character, kind of sticking more ground level. You could go with a character like Mr. Negative and it would work perfectly. But my main number one choice for my number one villain for Spider-Man 4 is Scorpion. Now, obviously, as I mentioned at the beginning, the reason why I love the Peter Parker MCU Spider-Man trilogy is because they really did focus on new and original villains that we hadn't seen before. They weren't rehashing the same old villains. Again, No Way Home, an exception, but No Way Home also doesn't really count because they were literally the old characters and the old actors. They weren't rehashing them, they were literally bringing the old ones back. But, you know, we got Vulture, we got Mysterio, and I think a big character from kind of like Spider-Man's main mythos of bad guys that we haven't seen yet is Scorpion. And Scorpion was set up in the post-credit scene of Spider-Man Homecoming. You may not remember this, but way back when, you know, back in 2017, which seems like such a long time ago, there was a post-credit scene with Michael Keaton as the Vulture and with Michael Mando as Vulture, Scorpion. And they kind of set him up to be a villain, and obviously that is amazing because not only is Scorpion a cool character, and again, like I said about Martin Lee, at this particular point for Peter, I think that bringing in a character like the Scorpion, and especially him being a character who's been connected to Peter in the past, it's a cool character to bring back story-wise. But also, you've got Michael frickin' Mando cast in the role, who you may know from Breaking Bad, but I also know him primarily from playing Voss in Far Cry 3, the main villain of Far Cry 3. And he just delivered an absolutely insane, sadistic performance in that game. And I feel like, you know, he's great as a villain. He would be a fantastic villain. And I think that, you know, it's weird. The MCU kind of cast him in this role and they set him up all those years ago. It feels like he's just sort of waiting to come back. You know, there's a few post-credit scenes like that in the MCU where they kind of set up a big thing and then it kind of takes a while for it to come to fruition. Like we know Samuel Stearns from The Incredible Hulk is now officially coming back in Captain America 4. I think similar thing with Michael Mando. He was cast as Scorpion, they set him up to be a big thing, and then they just kind of left him and we haven't heard from him since. So I think with Spider-Man 4 being the reset point for the character and him being a really cool character they set up a while ago, now's the perfect time to bring him back. And again, I think he would fit with the MCU Spider-Man tone because he is this new and original villain that we've not seen on screen before. He was never teased in any of the previous movies. We've never seen him before. Obviously, he's been in other media and stuff like cartoons and video games and whatnot, but in terms of cinematic Spider-Man, we have never seen Scorpion before. And I think that this is just the perfect opportunity to do it. So for me personally, like looking at all the potential candidates for Spider-Man 4, I think my number one choice, and who I personally believe will be the villain of Spider-Man 4, is going to be Michael Mando as Scorpion. But there you have it, guys. There's my thoughts on Spider-Man 4 and who I believe the villain is going to be. Make sure you leave your own choices in the comment section down below. Do you agree with mine? Do you disagree? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear what you think, because I feel like with Spider-Man, he's got so many cool and interesting villains that we could bring in. Like, screw it, bring in Big Wheel, you know what I mean? Like, just bring in like some really cool characters. But I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Make sure you let me know. And as always, if you want to see more content like this, obviously I know this was not DC, but I am trying to think of new ideas and kind of new things to do with this channel now that the Arrowverse has kind of moved on. So if you like this video and you want to see more content like this, make sure you let me know in the comments, hit that like button, whatever you want to do, just to give me an idea of what sort of content you want to see from me going forward. And if you do enjoy it, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any uploads from me. And I hope to see you guys again next time.